Most people believe a vegetable garden needs full blazing sun, 6 hours minimum. 8 if you want a real harvest. So that shady corner of your yard, that north-facing balcony, that strip beside the fence that never sees the afternoon light, you've written it off completely. But here's the surprise. Some of the most rewarding vegetables you can grow actually prefer shade. They sulk in harsh sun. They bolt, they wilt, they turn bitter. And in that cool, dappled, forgiving light you thought was useless, they thrive. So today we're counting down 10 vegetables that flourish in shade without direct sun. Real plants with real reasons that you can start in the space you already have. A patio that only gets morning light. A balcony shadowed by the building next door. The shady side of the house where nothing ever seemed to grow. And stay with me all the way to number 1, because the plant in that top spot can hand you harvest after harvest from a single planting in some of the deepest shade on this entire list. Most people never try it. Once you understand why it works, you'll wish you'd planted it years ago. Before we start, do me one quick favor. Drop your growing zone in the comments and tell me which way your shady spot faces. North, south, east, or west. It takes 5 seconds and it helps everyone watching figure out what will grow for them too. So find your shadiest corner and let's get started. At number 10, we begin with lettuce. And lettuce is the perfect place to start because it flips the whole sun rule on its head. Most people assume lettuce wants warmth and bright light to grow fast and full. The opposite is true. Lettuce is a cool season crop, and in the heat of full sun, it does something gardeners dread. It bolts. That means it sends up a tall flower stalk, stops making tender leaves, and turns bitter almost overnight. Shade slows all of that down. When lettuce sits in cooler, softer light, the soil stays moist longer, the leaves stay sweet, and the plant keeps producing for weeks instead of giving up in a hot rush. 3 to 4 hours of gentle morning sun or bright indirect light all day is genuinely all it needs. The leaves may grow a touch slower, but they grow tender and they last. Here's the practical part. You don't need depth for lettuce. The roots are shallow, so a pot just 6 to 8 inches deep is plenty. A window box, a salad bowl with a drainage hole, even an old plastic tub. Fill it with a light potting mix, scatter the seeds, barely cover them, and keep the surface damp. In a shady spot, you'll water less often than a gardener in full sun because that cool position holds moisture instead of baking it away. And the smartest trick with lettuce is the way you harvest it. Don't pull the whole plant. Just snip the outer leaves and leave the center to keep growing. That's called cut and come again, and one little container can feed you salads for a month or more. A shady balcony that grows nothing else can quietly grow your lunch. And that leads us straight to a vegetable that loves shade even more. At number 9, we have spinach. If lettuce tolerates shade, spinach practically demands it. Most people picture spinach as a tough, sun-loving green. But spinach is one of the fastest plants in the garden to bolt the moment it gets warm and bright. Long days and strong sun are a signal to spinach that summer is coming, and it rushes to flower and seed before the heat arrives. Once it bolts, the leaves turn thin and bitter, and the harvest is over. Shade is what keeps spinach calm. In a cooler, shadier spot, those warning signals never arrive, so the plant stays in leaf-making mode far longer. You get thick, dark, mild leaves for weeks instead of days. This is why so many gardeners get frustrated with spinach in summer and never realize the fix was simply less light. Spinach has shallow roots like lettuce, so a container 6 to 8 inches deep works beautifully. Keep the soil consistently moist, never soggy, and feed it lightly, because leafy greens are hungry for nitrogen. A spot that gets just a couple of hours of morning sun and then sits in shade for the rest of the day is close to perfect. Here's a number worth remembering. Spinach germinates best when soil temperatures are cool, roughly between 40 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit, and germination drops off sharply once the soil climbs past 80. That cool, shaded soil isn't a handicap. It's exactly the environment spinach was built for. The shade you thought was a problem is doing the work for you. And once you understand that leafy greens love shade, the next vegetable on our list will make perfect sense. At number 8, we have kale. Now, kale will grow in sun, that's true. But sun-grown kale and shade-grown kale are almost two different vegetables. Most people don't know that shade actually changes the way kale tastes. In hot, bright conditions, kale leaves can turn tough and sharp, with that bitter edge that makes people swear they hate it. Grown in cooler shade, the same plant gives you leaves that are softer, milder, and far more pleasant to eat. The science is gentle and simple. Heat and intense light push the plant to toughen its leaves and concentrate the bitter compounds that protect it. Cooler shade eases that pressure. The leaves stay tender, the flavor stays mellow, and the plant keeps producing from the bottom up for months. Kale is one of the longest living greens you can grow, and in partial shade, it just keeps going. Kale appreciates a little more root room than lettuce or spinach. So aim for a pot at least 8 to 10 inches deep with 1 plant per gallon or so of soil. Water it steadily, give it a position with 3 to 4 hours of soft light, and harvest the same way you harvest lettuce. Take the lower outer leaves first and let the center keep climbing. 1 plant treated this way can feed you for an entire season. And there's a quiet bonus. Cool weather and light shade make kale even sweeter after the first touch of cold, because the plant converts some of its starches to sugars to protect itself. Shade-grown, cool-grown kale is the tender, sweet version most people have never tasted. But if you think shade is only for leafy greens, the next vegetable will surprise you. At number 7, we have peas. And peas break the leafy green pattern, because here we're growing something you actually pick and pop open. Most people assume anything that produces a pod needs full sun to fill it out. Peas are the gentle exception. They're a cool season crop through and through, and too much heat is what ends their season early, not too little light. In partial shade, peas grow slower but steadier, and that cooler air keeps them producing pods long after a sun-baked plant would have quit. 3 to 4 hours of sun plus bright shade the rest of the day is enough to set a respectable crop. You trade a little speed for a longer, more forgiving harvest window, and on a shaded balcony, that's a trade worth making. Peas love to climb, and that's your secret weapon in a tight space. Give them a small trellis, a few stakes and string, even a section of netting against a railing, and they'll grow up instead of out. A pot 10 to 12 inches deep gives the roots room. And because peas are legumes, they actually pull nitrogen from the air and feed themselves. So they need very little fertilizer. They ask for less than almost anything else you can grow. And here's a tip most people miss. The young, curling tips of the pea plant, the top few inches of tender growth, are completely edible. They're called pea shoots, and they taste like fresh, sweet peas in leaf form. So even before a single pod forms, a shady pot of peas is already feeding you. Now, if you've been gardening for years and you're thinking none of this applies to your big sunny plot, stay with me, because this next one is for you too. At number 6, we have Swiss chard. Chard is the bridge between the nervous beginner and the seasoned gardener, because it's nearly impossible to fail with, and it solves a problem experienced gardeners know all too well. Most people plant their whole garden in the sunniest spot and leave the shady edges bare. But chard actually welcomes that afternoon shade, especially in summer, when sun-grown chard can wilt and slow down in the heat. Here's the part for the established gardener with an in-ground bed. You already have a shady strip, the north side of a tall tomato row, the cool ground behind your trellis, the bed that the fence shades afternoon. This weekend, with no new equipment, no new bed, tuck a few chard plants into that exact spot you've been ignoring. You don't need a container at all if you've got ground. You just need to stop fighting the shade and start planting into it. Chard is remarkably tough. It tolerates heat better than spinach and cold better than most greens. So in that in-between shaded light, it simply keeps producing. The leaves are mild and the stems are crisp, and the bright pink gold, and red stalks make it one of the prettiest vegetables you can grow. In a container, give it a pot 10 to 12 inches deep. Keep it watered and harvest the outer stalks one at a time. One chard plant can produce for many months, sometimes from spring straight through to frost. You cut the outer leaves, the center keeps pushing new ones, and the plant barely seems to notice. Whether you're working a windowsill or a half acre, that shady corner can finally earn its keep. And speaking of roots that grow underground, where you'd never expect shade to help, our next one is a real surprise. At number 5, we have beets. Now here's where people get nervous, because beets give you 2 crops in one, and most folks assume a root vegetable needs full sun to size up underground. The truth is more interesting. Beets grown in partial shade may produce a slightly smaller root, but they produce an abundance of something even more valuable, and most gardeners throw it away without thinking. The beet greens, the leafy tops of a beet plant, are tender, mild, and every bit as nutritious as chard, which makes sense because they're closely related. In partial shade, the plant pours its energy into lush, beautiful leaves, and you can harvest a few from each plant while still letting the root develop below. 2 harvests from one seed in light most people consider too weak to grow anything. Beets want a pot at least 10 to 12 inches deep so the roots have room to form. The classic beginner mistake is forgetting that each beet seed is actually a cluster that sprouts several seedlings, so you must thin them. Snip the extras at soil level, leaving the strongest plant about 3 inches from its neighbors. If you skip this, you get a tangle of leaves and no real roots. Thin them and you get both. Give beets 3 to 4 hours of sun and steady moisture, and be patient. The roots take longer in shade, but the greens come fast and keep coming. Even if your beets never grow large, you've still grown a steady supply of one of the best cooking greens there is in a spot that grew nothing before. And that idea that the part you'd throw away is the real prize carries right into number 4. At number 4, we have radishes. Radishes are the fastest gratification on this entire list, and that makes them perfect for shade gardening because shade slows things down and radishes are in such a hurry that the slowdown actually helps. Most people plant radishes in full sun and watch them turn woody, cracked, and unbearably hot tasting in the heat. In cooler shade, they grow crisp, mild, and juicy instead. Here's why. Radishes are a quick, cool season root. When they grow too fast in hot, bright conditions, they get sharp and pithy, and they can split or bolt before you ever pull them. Partial shade keeps the soil cooler and the moisture steadier, and that even unhurried growth is what gives you a sweet, snappy radish instead of a fiery little disappointment. The beautiful thing about radishes is how little they ask. They have shallow roots, so a container just 6 inches deep will do. They're ready astonishingly fast, many varieties in 3 to 4 weeks from seed, which means even in shade you can grow several rounds in a single season. So a pinch of seeds, thin them to about 1 inch apart, keep them damp, and watch. And don't forget, radish leaves are edible too. Mild and pleasant when young, wonderful, sauteed or dropped into soup. So even the humble radish gives you more than you expected. In the time it takes most vegetables to get going, you've already harvested and replanted. But if speed is the radish's gift, our next vegetable offers something almost the opposite. Quiet, steady, fragrant generosity. At number 3, we reach the herbs, and this is where shade gardening really starts to feel generous. Most people assume herbs are sun worshippers, picturing rows of basil baking on a hot patio. But many of the most useful kitchen herbs are woodland or understory plants by nature, and they grow soft, lush, and flavorful in shade. We're talking about parsley, cilantro, mint, and chives. Cilantro is the perfect example because it behaves exactly like spinach. In full sun and heat, cilantro bolts almost immediately, shooting up to flower and leaving you with hardly any leaf. In cool shade, it stays leafy and productive far longer, giving you weeks of fresh harvest instead of days. Parsley grows richer and greener out of the harsh sun. Mint, a true shade lover, can become almost aggressive in a shady pot, which is exactly why you keep it in a pot in the first place. These herbs ask for very little. A container 6 to 8 inches deep, a bright spot out of direct afternoon sun, and steady moisture. Chives are nearly indestructible and come back year after year. Mint will fill any container you give it.
And because you harvest herbs in small pinches as you cook, a single shaded pot by the kitchen door can flavor your meals for months without ever looking bare. Here's the quiet money lesson hiding in this one.
If you want to go even deeper into growing food from containers in shady spots and small spaces with a clear system for every season, I put together a complete guide called The Container Harvest that walks through exactly this approach. It covers which varieties to choose, how to set up your containers for the best yields, and how to keep harvesting long after most people have given up. You can find the full details linked in the description at quietfarmliving.com, and it's the kind of resource that pays for itself the first time you skip the grocery store herb aisle for good. And that brings us to the last two, the most surprising shade lovers of all. At number 2, we have broccoli and its cousins in the same family, like cauliflower and cabbage. This one stops people in their tracks because broccoli looks like such a big, hungry plant that surely it must demand full sun, and broccoli will take sun. But the reason it frustrates so many home gardeners is heat, not light, and that's where shade quietly saves the crop. Broccoli forms its head, the part you eat, as a tight cluster of unopened flower buds. When the weather turns hot and the sun is intense, the plant panics and rushes those buds open into yellow flowers, ruining the head. Gardeners call this bolting, and in full summer sun, it can happen fast. Partial shade keeps the plant cooler and calmer, holding that head tight and tender for much longer, giving you a real window to harvest at the perfect moment. Broccoli does need more root room than the greens we've talked about, so give it a larger container, ideally 3 to 5 gallons per plant, and feed it well, because it's a heavy feeder. Keep the soil consistently moist. A spot with morning sun and shaded afternoons is close to ideal because it shelters the plant from the hottest, most stressful hours of the day. And here's the part most beginners never learn. After you cut the main central head, don't pull the plant. Leave it in place, keep feeding and watering it, and it will produce a steady flush of smaller side shoots from where the leaves meet the stem. Those side shoots can keep coming for weeks. One shaded broccoli plant treated patiently gives you the big head first and then a long, generous encore. But as good as that is, it still can't quite match the plant waiting for us at number 1. And that brings us to number 1. The vegetable that flourishes in the deepest shade asks the least of you and keeps on giving long after a single planting. At the very top of our list, we have asparagus. Now, most people would never dream of growing asparagus at home. They think of it as a commercial crop, something that takes special land and endless patience. But here's the truth that changes everything. Asparagus is a perennial. You plant it once, and it comes back on its own, year after year, for a remarkably long time. And it does this in partial shade, in the cool, dappled, forgiving light that almost everything else on this list merely tolerates. This is the secret payoff we've been building toward. Most vegetables are annuals. You plant them, you harvest them, and at the end of the season they're gone, and you start over from scratch. Asparagus refuses to play by those rules. Once it's established, an asparagus crown sends up tender spears every single spring, all on its own from the same root system in the same spot without you replanting a thing. According to long-standing guidance from university extension programs, a well-tended asparagus bed can keep producing for 15 to 20 years and sometimes longer. Plant it once. Harvest it for 2 decades. Here's why shade works in its favor. The part of asparagus you eat is the young spear, the new shoot pushing up in spring before the weather turns hot. In a partly shaded spot, the soil stays cool and moist longer into the season, which means the spears keep coming at that perfect tender stage instead of toughening up in a rush of heat. The leafy fern-like growth that follows is happy in shade too. quietly gathering energy and storing it back in the roots to fuel next year's spears. Now, asparagus does ask for one thing the others don't, and that's patience at the start. You plant crowns, which are simply the dormant root systems, available cheaply in early spring, and you give them a deep container or a permanent bed because those roots run deep and the plant will live there for years. A large, deep pot or a half barrel works for a small planting. The first year you let it grow and don't harvest, so the roots can build strength. By the second and especially the third spring, you begin cutting spears, and from then on, it simply produces season after season, almost entirely on its own. Think about what that really means for someone with a shady balcony and not much time. You do the work one weekend, one time, you wait a couple of seasons, and then every spring for the next 15 or 20 years, fresh asparagus rises out of a shady corner where you once believed nothing could grow, no replanting, no fuss. Just a quiet, faithful harvest that returns like clockwork while you do almost nothing. That's why it earns the #1 spot. It's the closest thing to a vegetable that grows itself, and it does its best work out of the harsh sun. So let's take a breath and look back at what your shade can actually do. The lettuce and spinach that stay sweet because the heat never reaches them. The kale that turns tender and mild instead of tough. The peas and their edible shoots climbing a railing. The chard you can tuck into a bed you already have. The beets giving you greens and roots at once. The radishes racing to harvest in a few short weeks. The herbs by your kitchen door, replacing those overpriced little plastic packs. The broccoli holding its head tight in the cool, and the asparagus, faithful for 20 years from a single planting. Here's the real lesson, hiding in all of it. Good gardening was never about having the sunniest yard or the biggest plot or the most expensive gear. It's about understanding what each plant actually wants and then matching it to the space you already have. That shady corner isn't a limitation. For these plants, it's the ideal home. You don't need more room. You need the right plant and the right light and a little patience. If you'd rather grow real food simply in the space you've got instead of overspending or overworking for it, then you're exactly the kind of grower this place is for. Slow, steady, and smart beats big and busy every time. So here's what I'd love you to do right now. Go back up to that comment box and tell me your growing zone and which way your shady spot faces. North, south, east, or west. Don't just think it, actually type it and hit reply. Because the more of us who share, the more we all learn about what really grows in the shade. I read them, and other gardeners do too. And if this gave you a new way to look at that forgotten corner of your home, consider subscribing and growing along with us. We're a calm little community that's quietly learning to grow more with less. Because next time, we're going one step further into the vegetables that can keep producing food for you straight through the cold months, long after most gardens have gone to sleep. You won't want to miss which ones make that list. Until then, find your shade, plant something in it, and let it surprise you.